Next up we have Dr. Mark Player, also from the University of Reading, and his title is better expressed up there.
There is. Hello, thank you, John. I'd like to begin with some caveats, I guess, before I get into things. I should say this is kind of a work in progress. It's more of an initial sketch rather than a complete sort of full thing, so I'm kind of looking forward to sort of discussions on how best to sort of take that forward. I've only recently, because my expertise is more in Japanese cinema, so I'm sort of more recently starting to branch out into sort of Chinese speaking stuff, so I'm very much approaching this as a student rather than as an expert, I guess. And also, I'm probably a little bit rusty because it's been a couple of years since I last did one of these, so hopefully my skills are still intact, but we shall see. So yeah, this paper is going to consider the following. It's going to consider media in spatial terms, spaces in medial terms, how these spaces can be understood intermedially, and the role of the body in producing or completing these intermediate spaces. And to do this, I'm going to talk about the 2004 film The World by Jia Zhangke, which is a film I've been fascinated with for quite a long time now. This is my first opportunity to actually sort of start talking about it, particularly kind of its issues of local and global citizenship, and also kind of how these issues are kind of explored through these kind of highly mediatized environments. So just a little bit of context about the film. It's the fourth feature by Jia Zhangke. It was his first to be kind of authorized by the Chinese government. It follows characters who work in and around the Beijing World Park, which was a real life, it still is, a real life theme park, featuring scaled down replicas of world famous landmarks. But the story of the film focuses mainly on the performer, Tao, who's in the poster image there, and her security guard boyfriend, Hye Jean. The film was shot on location in the World Park, but it also uses another park that's very similar called Window of the World, which is in Shenzhen, which is they're about 1,200 miles apart from each other. But they both opened at around the same time, so architecturally they're very similar, and the film uses both. But in terms of the narrative, it's the Beijing World Park, but it uses bits from the other park. So the film shows a modern kind of globalising China. Themes are reflected in how the film was made. So it was an international co-production between China, France and Japan. And it was also shot digitally, which is kind of a novelty at the time, because most films are shot sort of digitally nowadays, but in 2004 a lot of theatrically released films were still being shot on film, and so video was kind of a different sort of aesthetic back then. But also, film also deals with issues of cosmopolitan mobility, facsimile, and globalization's conflation of real and virtual spaces. The origins of the film, from what I can tell at least, sort of seems to be traced back to a 2003 symposium that was held by the Chinese Film Bureau. So the Chinese Film Bureau invited over 50 underground filmmakers, which included Jia at the time, in a bid to basically consolidate their activities into something that resembled more of an industry that could basically engage in the international film world without problems that they've had before. So, for example, a film that Lucia mentioned in her talk, Suzhou River, premiered at the International Film Festival in Rotterdam in 2000, but it kind of didn't go through proper channels. So it basically meant that the film was banned in China for several years, and I think Liu was banned from filmmaking for a couple of years as well. Zhao began writing his script for The World after this symposium, so it seems to me at least that there's this kind of intent on trying to engage a kind of international audience, and that obviously plugs into the themes of the film. So thus The World is a direct example of an attempt to create a modern dynamic Chinese cinema that's kind of capable of kind of engaging, or at least kind of engaging with global film production, international film festivals, and so on. So I was going to show you, sort of a clip. This is basically a kind of it's about 2 minutes long. It's kind of a ground level view of the park, and also it sort of sets up a lot of the ideas I'm going to be sort of picking apart on throughout the talk.
装不清楚他，就要每个都背咋了，搁这儿还有。这是英国的大本钟，这个可以，这是法国的埃菲尔铁塔，这个巴黎圣母院，听说过？
这个字肯定看过啊。
Yeah, so the sequence shows people interacting with numerous replicas of landmarks. It's good I actually get a chance to prepare my, I've got a laser as well, wow. So we've got, yeah, Leaning Tower of Pisa, we've got the Mouth of Truth, St. Peter's Basilica and the Vatican City, and we've also, so that first segment is obviously in some kind of Italy zone in the park where they put all the Italy landmarks together, and then we have Manhattan there in the bottom corner. So these kind of act as kind of, I guess, synecdoches of the cultures of which they're, or the cultures and countries of which they're from. The replicas are of varying scale, emphasising the theme of facsimile. Tourists engage with replicas as if they are the actual landmarks that they depict. So you get the, I'll be talking about this a bit later, this kind of doing the kind of the pose with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Some people are obviously less enthusiastic, like the two guys, you see them there. These are Taishen's friends, they're construction workers. So there's a disconnect also between the reality of the park and the reality of the real world. So that kind of Two Towers reference there. So even though the world is kind of changing, but the park is kind of remaining in a sort of constant, like it's the world in 1993, which is when the park opened. The replicas are unique, highly detailed, and exist in 3 dimensions. They're architectural in appearance, but their scaled down nature makes them also kind of sculptural. So in some ways it makes them kind of artworks in their own right. So this has got me thinking about the ways we can understand media's relationship to space and understanding media in spatial terms. So here's a few, these are sort of paradigms I've kind of dabbled with over the years in different kind of contexts. We have a mediascape, which is coined by Arjun Appadurai, which also in sort of the spirit of intermediality, these are all kind of derived from disciplines outside of cinema, just kind of, it's a thing. You have mediascape, atmospheric media which is Furuhato Yuriko, and a concept called media heterotopias. I'm going to very briefly just summarize each one in turn, and then sort of move on from that. So Mediascape was one of 5 escapes proposed by anthropologist Arjun Appadurai as a way to kind of understand globalisation, and it basically conceptualises media both in terms of media producers, so like studios, radio stations, TV stations, but also media texts like films and books. It conceptualises them as a kind of as a metaphorical landscape, but then in a lot of films, in other ways as well. The Beijing World Park in particular represents kind of more of a literal mediascape where guests encounter replicas of landmarks, but also there are performance-based elements as well. So we have a kind of a big Egyptian-themed sort of routine going on down there. It also conveys text-based mobile phone. The film also conveys text-based mobile phone communication in landscape terms, using computer animation sequences made with Adobe Flash. These, according to Michael Berry, represent the inner sides of the characters, a kind of artificial world, and the digital escapist world of the cell phone. So in the film we've got this kind of interesting thing where spaces are becoming mediatized, but also media is becoming kind of spatialized. Atmospheric media was emerged from Japanese architectural discourse from the 1960s, and there was a lot of discourse at the time around kind of media saturated urban environments. So there was a lot of advertising coming up on the screen, a lot of picture-based media was starting to appear on all the buildings. This becomes especially palpable in the 1980s, which is an era I've spent quite a lot of time focusing on, where you get like large format outdoor screens appearing and becoming prominent architectural features in their own right. So this is the outer vision screen on the Shìjiè. This is in Shìjiè, Japan. I think it's the first of its kind in Japan. I think it started in April 1980. That also probably means it's probably the first in East Asia as well. For Furuhato, media's become part of our atmosphere, seamlessly blending into our surroundings, like the air that we breathe that envelops us. And the world is sort of presenting a modern Beijing where visuals, but more pervasively the sounds of screen media, are starting to encroach public spaces. So this is the Beijing railway station where you've got a big multi-wall thing going on here, and this is just on a local city bus where we've got an ad for the Beijing World Park playing on a screen. So the Beijing World Park itself also uses media to create an atmosphere of an intercultural kind of other space via the sculptural replicas of the landmarks and also the performances of cultural customs. I should probably also note in the earlier clip you have the 4 young ladies dressed as kind of flight crew. They're not flight, they work at the park. They're dressed as that as a way to promote this kind of international mobility kind of image. And the last one, this is the fiddlier one, is media heterotopias. This is proposed by the Korean media theorist Hye Jean Chung. It expands on Michel Foucault's concept of heterotopia, or other spaces, and challenges the notion of cinematic space as a seamless unity. Instead, it considers cinematic space as a textured, multi-layered assemblage of mediated materiality, or a composite of physical locations and digitally manipulated images. So the idea of heterotopia, I'm not going to go into the history of it too deeply, but it emerged from a lecture. Foucault gave a lecture in the 1960s, and he came up with the following 6 principles. I'm not going to go through all these principles, but I think point 6 is quite interesting in heterotopia's relation to surrounding real spaces. So that would be, he sort of posited 2 at the time, to create spaces that expose real spaces as being illusory, or spaces of illusion, or to create idealized or perfected versions of real spaces, spaces of compensation. So we can see instantly how somewhere like the Beijing World Park is obviously becoming a space of compensation. It's a place for people who can't necessarily go to these places in real life, so the next best thing is for them to go to the park. But as Chung notes, because also Chung actually wrote a whole chapter about the world in relation to media heterotopia, which is kind of how I kind of got into it. The world illustrates heterotopia's role of exposing real spaces as illusory. It does this not by not deploying technologies to create a seamless virtual space, which is what a lot of like Hollywood film productions will try to hide the visuals, hide the kind of the digital elements, or to erase borders between reality and simulation. Instead, the film uses them to draw our attention to seams and disjunctures. The Beijing World Park offers cosmopolitan fantasies of international travel. However, Chung calls the film's characters virtual cosmopolitans, who lack the practical means of achieving transnational mobility, but they use vernacular forms of visual media as a mode of transportation that enables them to participate in the virtual experience of global citizenship. So, what does Chung mean by this? So, this is a moment from the film that Chung also uses as an example in her chapter. Basically, Tao and Hye Jean have just had like a little bit of an argument, and Hye Jean is now trying to cheer her up by taking her on a magic carpet ride.
飞刚开声，你们俩来啦！
恭喜恭喜啊！
谢谢。生意怎么样？还行，刚开嘛。哎，进来玩一把。
玩一把。
感受一下。
这什么意思啊？
魔毯游世界。给你们刻张 DVD。好，来，小张准备开始了啊！
飞一个啊！
来，飞一个。
来。
好，来，好，来，开始飞。哎，小桃开心点儿，挥挥手。哎，好。向下看。
So this is what Chung has to say about that particular sequence. So this magic carpet sequence reveals the process of digital manipulation and exposes the seams between materiality and mediated representation. Even so, the joyful enthusiasm expressed by Tao and Hye Jean in the sequence alludes to the pleasurable experience one can derive from the mediated reality of digital imagery, or the intoxicating freedom of the digital. This sequence thereby highlights digital media's ability to simulate the sensation of physical mobility. So based on all this, the following observations have emerged. Media environments of the world provide modes of escape for people that are both real, the park, and virtual, the phone. Admittedly, this paper is, the phone aspects of this film I'm not really going to be able to touch on that much, but I'm mostly focusing on the park stuff for this paper. These media environments, be they scapes or atmospheres or heterotopias, are given meaning and are completed by the presence of the body. These environments are made up of various media, sculpture, performance, cameras, video screens, mobile phones, etc., and are connected through the body. And connections between various media, both with and through the body, implies the production of intermedial spaces. Obviously there's been numerous paradigms for how intermediality relates to cinema over the years. I'm only going to focus on one, and it was something that Agnes Peffo brought up. This is basically all she kind of said. It was very passing in an article that she wrote in 2010, and which is basically the idea of cinematic intermediality as an other space, as a heterotopia in itself. So Peffo writes, intermediality appears as a border zone across which media transgressions take place, or an unstable place of in-between, a passageway from one media towards another. The site for intermedial relations to be played out is considered in much of the literature of cinematic intermediality as an impossible place, a heterotopia, making use of Foucault's term. It is also a fact that explicitly intermedial films often prefer diegetic settings that can be directly associated with the principles of heterotopia described by Foucault, and such heterotopias also often serve as allegorical sites for intermedial relations to be brought to the viewer's attention in some self-reflexive films. So we can see a film that uses the Beijing World Park as its setting, which is kind of a very heterotopic site, and it combines and juxtaposes different kinds of space together. In theory, makes the film especially susceptible to intermediate phenomena. So I guess the back end of this paper is I'm going to now consider, what am I considering? I'm considering 3 moments of the film, and how the body is now starting to kind of relate to these sort of spaces, 2 of which we've actually already seen. So I'm going to return to the magic carpet, for example. So this can also be, Chung calls it a media heterotopia, but you could make the case that it's also an intermedial heterotopia due to the presence and reliance of multimedia forms. The magic carpet experience is predicated on media technologies, camcorder, blue screen backdrop, television, music that's pre-recorded and you hear through the TV, and the presence of bodies. Tao and Tai Shen complete this imaginary media space of a couple riding a magic carpet against a pre-recorded backdrop. Camera operator tilts camera from side to side, simulating the carpet's flight. So she's helping to produce, but she's also completing the space. So there is even though she's the camera operator, but she's kind of performing the magic carpet movement because the carpet's just a prop. Tao's happiness, and I think this is something that Chung kind of misses a trick here with her analysis. Tao's happiness is also performed. She literally just had an argument with her boyfriend before this, and so she's kind of putting this happy thing on because it's being recorded on DVD. So I need to look happy in this. So that kind of introduces a kind of a performative dimension to this idea of virtual cosmopolitans. So the second example is what I'm kind of affectionately calling the Pisa pose. I don't know if this actually has a real name or not. So the Pisa pose, for those who don't know, is basically it's a photograph that uses forced perspective to make somebody look like that they are kind of holding up the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which is a popular thing that tourists do. This pose requires 3 elements. It requires the tower, of course, as an architectural form, the body, which is performing the pose, and a camera, photography. Thus, a performative body becomes a link that kind of sutures photography and sculpture, not necessarily in the conceptual fusion sense of intermediality, which is sort of the Dick Higgins kind of approach, but it's predicated more on a kind of a spatial proximity, like an intermedia by proxy, I suppose. And in the world, local park visitors perform the pose, role-playing as foreign tourists who would go to actually do the pose for the real tower in Italy. But, as you notice here, well, you've got 2 sort of doing it here. This guy clearly hasn't got the memo, he's just sort of posing next to it. But because of the placement of Zhao's camera, we kind of see the illusion because the camera is not aligned with the position of she's doing the pose for a camera based on the eye line. The camera's probably just off of, the photographer is probably just off of camera, so you get this kind of, sort of disconnect. So this implies an understanding of the real world through media representations. But as you notice here, I was going to ask a question. Have people been to the real Tower of Pisa?
Yeah.
Here. Have any of you done this kind of pose? Because you wouldn't be alone, obviously, because
No.
it's quite a popular
There's
thing.
lots that were doing it though.
Yeah, even dogs are doing it now. So there's an implication that there's an imitative behaviour in the park because they're kind of they've seen tourists do it presumably through other media, through photographs and things like that. So, well, I'm going to do that as well, but I'm going to do it with the tower the tower that's in the Beijing World Park. So there's this idea that I've seen it in the movies. I've seen it through other media. So there's this sense of the body understanding, or Chinese body specifically, understanding the world through other media. And there are kind of conscious and unconscious versions of this. So there's various chapters in the film, or chapter headings, one of which being Tokyo Story, which is a clear reference to the Ozu film. It's also kind of a nod to the film being a Japanese co-production. And there are kind of, this is admittedly a little bit of a stretch on my part, but you do get these kind of, what I would call like an unconscious thing. So putting the hand in the mouth for truth, and if you lie, the hand sort of bites you. That's, films like Roman Holiday have helped kind of popularise that, especially before the advent of like affordable international air travel and things like that. Jia did intend for that to be more of a thing in the film. There's a scene they shot and then they deleted, where they basically do a parody of Titanic on a cruise liner, and they had to cut it because they wanted to use like a cover of the Celine Dion song, and they couldn't afford the rights, so they had to cut it. The DNA of this is kind of lingering because there's one of the rooms in the apartment block, the accommodation block that the staff live in. There's posters of the Titanic on the wall and stuff, so there is kind of the DNA of it is kind of lingering. And then the final example, if there's time, is it's a scene near the end of the film. It's one of Tao's friends is getting married. So Tao's friend, who's another pawn in the park, she's just gotten married. She's holding up her marriage certificate, which actually looks a lot like a passport, but it's actually a marriage certificate. But she's doing so in a way that resembles the pose of the Statue of Liberty, using the certificate as the tablia ansta that the statue holds, which is singing a song about her being my Statue of Liberty, which confirms the intention of the pose. And this embodying the statue also implies the embodiment of the architectural and the sculpture as kind of a living sculpture. And this speaks to the other ideas of the body assuming or channeling media properties. So like Peffer, for example, has written a lot about the tableau vivant in world cinema. There's also, this is from dance studies actually, media body, which is sort of how the body is kind of interacting in performance installation spaces. Tao's friend is then effectively internalizing the intermedial space of the Beijing World Park, where she both works and lives, by assuming the form of one of the park's replicas. Thus, the character, and by extension the film, is embracing a global future. That's pretty much it. I had one amusing thought that came through my mind when I was looking at this. Which statue is she kind of imitating? Is she imitating the one in the park, which actually you don't see in the film, but it is in the park, or is she imitating the real Statue of Liberty? I actually sort of know the answer to this because I found this is a clip of Jia basically directing this scene, but they basically look it up on the computer.
烧酒杯它是就你那个过程啊，可能就短。不，酒瓶子，亲爱的，那个整个酒瓶子，自由女生不是拿一个火炬吗？整个酒瓶子往下周的。现在我现在能不能找到自由女神那个像啊？我看看她造型究竟是什么样的。自由女神哈。你问她有没有带那个带电脑查一下上了。你看啊，左手拿着结婚证，右手举着瓶子，左手拿结婚证。那我这样。不，转过来。右手是低的。转过来。好，你一直这样举的，你使我心中自由女神开始出水，明白吗？一直这样，一直装自由女神啊！不是那个样子，那是梦露。来，那个谁，那个玉，来给他看一下自由女神是什么样子。
So yeah, that's more or less it. I did have, I guess, a little bit of a postscript. There were things I wanted to include, but I've had to cut out, and things that I'm also aware of that I couldn't find a way of working into the structure of this particular paper. There's more broader contextual issues. Obviously, China won the bid for the 2008 Olympics in 2001, so there's a big modernising overhaul going on around the time this film was made, and that's kind of, there's lots of subplots about construction workers and things like that. So that's a big kind of thing. Obviously, the advent of the internet in China and how that kind of drew lines between real and virtual life. The rise of kind of Shanghai production, like copycat, counterfeit kind of culture. So like counterfeit clothes, counterfeit electronics and things, consumer electronics and things like that. There's subplots in the film about fake passports and things like that. The animation sequences that I mentioned very briefly, but they're like a recurring motif in the film, which show bodies in ways that both visualize and sort of spatialize their feelings and desires. Made of Adobe Flash, which at the time was a very kind of internet coded thing, because that was something that, early, this is like before YouTube and stuff, but early video sharing, people would make like little Adobe Flash animations and sort of put them online. Film being shot digitally versus film, there's probably an intermedial aspect there, because it's presented like a film, scoped, flowing camera. And that also has an effect on how we then perceive these kind of on-screen bodies. That's kind of all I have to say. Thank you.